When the legends start walking, fear becomes real. From hunters chasing a grizzly to hikers hearing knocks in the dark, these encounters reveal that something massive and intelligent is moving through forests, cliffs, and desert, and it's watching us. Tracks appear where no human could walk, gear is rearranged, and silence turns to breathing that isn't yours. The stories you're about to hear blur the line between myth and witness, between wild and impossible. Keep your lights on, because once you hear the knock, it's already too late. Watch till the end. It was October 14th, 2025, deep in the untamed wilderness of western Montana, where rugged mountains met vast valleys lined with pine and spruce. The morning air carried the chill of early frost, and fog clung low to the timberline. Tyler Reed, a 38-year-old hunter and forestry worker, led two close friends, Mason Grant and Luke Porter, on a week-long hunting trip. The three men had grown up together in Missoula and spent years tracking elk, deer, and the occasional bear across these same ridges. Experienced in the backcountry, they respected nature's dangers but were confident in their abilities. Tyler, the most seasoned of the group, had worked in conservation for over a decade, balancing his knowledge of animal behavior with hunting ethic. Mason, 35, was a quiet marksman who preferred long-range tracking, while Luke, the youngest at 32, brought energy and quick reflexes. They had hunted together countless times, each trusting the other completely. Their plan was to pursue what they believed to be an unusually large grizzly, reported by locals near the remote Birch Valley, a place rarely visited except by loggers and trappers. The morning began calm and still. The men hiked along a narrow trail cut through the valley floor, carrying rifles and packs loaded with gear. Frost coated the grass, and the ground crackled softly under their boot. Then Tyler noticed something strange in the mud along the riverbank, tracks larger than any they had ever seen. At first glance, they looked like bear prints, but the shape was different. The impressions were wide, flat, and distinctly human-like, with 5 toes spread evenly across the front. Each step sank deep into the earth, spaced at long intervals, as though made by something walking upright. They followed the trail, curiosity overcoming caution. The tracks led uphill, weaving between trees and boulders. The forest was silent except for the soft creak of branches in the cold wind. As they moved deeper into the woods, a rhythmic knocking echoed from somewhere ahead, a deep, hollow sound like wood striking wood. Mason slowed, scanning the trees through the scope of his rifle. Luke whispered that it could be logging noise from far away, but Tyler shook his head. The pattern was too deliberate, too controlled. The knocking stopped. Moments later, movement flickered between the pines. A massive shape, tall, dark, and wide-shouldered, shifted behind the trees. Its outline was nearly 9 feet tall, its head level with the lowest branches. It stepped forward briefly, revealing long arms and a solid frame covered in dark hair. The hunters froze where they stood, unable to react. Whatever it was no bear. The figure paused, the air thick with tension, and a deep, heavy exhalation rolled through the forest like thunder. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished into the trees below. For a few seconds after the tall figure vanished, the woods fell completely silent. The only sound was the faint hiss of wind through dry pine needles. Tyler, Mason, and Luke stood frozen in the same place, staring at the dark forest slope where the shape had disappeared. None of them spoke or even moved at first. The stillness felt heavy, almost unnatural, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The scent of damp earth and pine hung in the air, mixed with the faint musk of something wild and unknown. Mason crouched to study the ground. There, in the soft soil near the fallen logs, were fresh imprints. The shape was wide and long, and each step pressed deep into the ground. Steam rose from the impressions, as if the creature's body heat had melted frost. The distance between each print was far greater than any normal stride. The men slowly followed the marks downhill, careful not to make noise, each step deliberate and cautious. The trail led past torn branches and overturned logs, signs of powerful movement. The air grew colder as the sun slipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the valley. As they reached the lower slope, a strange vibration rolled through the ground, a low, rhythmic pulse that felt more like a tremor than sound. The noise came from the forest floor itself, echoing through their boots. Tyler lifted his head and caught a glimpse of something large moving beyond the trees. It shifted with quiet grace, disappearing again before they could focus. A deep exhale drifted through the still air, heavy and slow, followed by a single hollow crack that echoed from somewhere deeper in the forest. Fear settled over the men like a weight. They no longer cared about the hunt. Without a word, they turned and began the long hike back toward their truck parked miles away. Each step through the gathering darkness felt longer, colder, and quieter. Every snapping twig sent their hearts racing. The forest seemed to watch from every direction, thick with unseen eyes. When they finally reached the valley road, night had fully fallen. Their faces were pale from cold and shock. They loaded their gear in silence and drove through the narrow pass without speaking once. The following morning, the three men returned to the ranger station to report what they had seen. They turned in their hunting tags early, unwilling to return to those woods. Their story spread quietly among locals, who thereafter avoided that part of the valley. In the days that followed, rangers checked the area. They found large footprints preserved in half-frozen mud, nearly twice the length of a man's boot, but no bear signs, no claw mark, and no dens. Hunters who visited that region in later seasons claimed the animals avoided it completely. For years afterward, no grizzly tracks appeared in that valley again, only the faint memory of what the three men had witnessed on that silent, haunted mountain. It was June 14, 2025, deep in the remote wilderness of western Montana, where thick forests and mountain ridges stretched endlessly under a starlit sky. The clearing where the friends parked their RV was quiet, bordered by dense pine trees and a narrow stream that shimmered faintly under the moon. Ethan Carter, a 28-year-old wildlife photographer, had chosen the spot after days of research, hoping to capture early summer shots of elk and owls. He was joined by three close friends: Marcus Hill, an outdoor guide familiar with the terrain; Riley Thompson, a college lecturer with a fascination for astronomy; and Sean Walker, an auto mechanic who often joined their trips for the thrill of adventure. The group had been exploring Montana's remote trails for over a week, documenting landscapes and enjoying the isolation far from towns and roads. Their RV was stocked with supplies, maps, and cameras, while a small campfire burned outside to keep the evening chill away. As darkness deepened, they sat inside, planning their route for the next day before turning in for the night. The air was still, and only the soft hum of insects broke the silence. By 3 a.m., the forest was silent and black, the moon hidden behind slow-moving clouds. Then came the first noise, a dull thump against the RV wall. At first, it seemed like shifting branches or settling ground, but then another followed, rhythmic, steady, almost measured. Each impact made the metal surface tremble slightly. The four friends froze, straining their ears. The next sound was deeper, like a low breath or exhalation moving through the trees. Sean, the lightest sleeper, leaned toward the narrow window above his bunk. The fire outside had burned down to red embers, but he could still see faint outlines between the trunk. A large shadow moved just beyond the edge of the firelight. Its shape was massive, upright, silent except for the slow crunch of ground beneath it. Then it was gone, swallowed by the dark when he blinked. Inside the RV, the air felt heavy. The thumping started again, this time closer, on the opposite wall. The structure vibrated as though something huge leaned its full weight against it. Cups on the small counter rattled, and the overhead lights flickered slightly from the tremor. Ethan whispered for everyone to stay quiet, his heart racing. The friends listened as the strange sounds shifted around them, soft drags across the roof, then faint taps on the door. Something brushed against the side mirrors. The air vents emitted the faintest echo of low breathing, like a pulse in the dark. No one dared move or speak. Outside, the clearing remained still. but something was circling just out of sight. Inside the dark RV, the silence deepened until even the faint hum of the generator seemed to fade away. The four friends sat frozen, their breathing shallow and uneven. Every few moments, a soft scrape echoed from the roof, like something dragging its weight slowly across the metal. The sound of deep, slow exhalations moved from one side of the vehicle to the other, each one heavy enough to make the windows quiver slightly. The air felt colder, the pressure inside dropping as if the night itself was closing in. Then came another thump, louder than before, shaking the entire RV. A loose backpack toppled from a shelf. Ethan's pulse pounded as he tried to focus on the sound's rhythm. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, spaced evenly, as though something was pacing around the vehicle. The air vents began to hum faintly again. Soft, rumbling breaths carried through the metal frame. No one dared to reach for the flashlight. Every small sound inside seemed to echo, and even shifting weight on the seats made the floor creak unnaturally loud. Minutes stretched into hours. Sometimes there was silence, and then a sudden distant knock, 3 slow raps against the back door. The pattern repeated from the other side, as though the unseen visitor was circling them again and again. Marcus clenched his jaw, trying to keep calm, while Riley's eyes stayed fixed on the thin curtains covering the windows. Beyond the fabric, faint shadows moved, bending as if someone, or something, was walking just inches from the glass. The air grew heavier, almost suffocating, as the slow thumping returned to the roof once more. Eventually, the noises began to fade. The rhythmic knocking grew distant until only the whisper of the wind remained. Then the forest fell completely silent. No crickets, no owls, nothing at all. The group waited, unmoving, until the first faint hint of morning light crept through the treetops. Their nerves were raw, but curiosity overpowered fear. Slowly, Ethan unlatched the door. The cold morning air filled the RV. Outside, the clearing was eerily still. The campfire had long gone out, but the ground around the RV was covered with massive impressions. The prints were barefoot, each one deep in the soft earth, some measuring over 6 feet long. They formed a wide circle around the vehicle, spaced evenly, almost deliberately. The world inside the circle was untouched, as though whatever had made them had never stepped closer than the walls. The friends searched for animal tracks or signs of human presence, but none existed. The soil around the perimeter was smooth and undisturbed, except for those enormous shapes that led off into the thick forest, disappearing completely within a few yards. The gear outside the RV was oddly rearranged, bags stacked neatly, cooking tools lined up as if someone had handled them carefully. Nothing was stolen, yet everything had been moved. Later that afternoon, park rangers arrived after the group reported the event. They examined the prints, but no known species matched the size or depth. There were no tire marks, boot prints, or animal trails nearby. The ground told a single story. Something massive, walking on 2 legs, had moved around them in perfect silence. The friends left the clearing before sunset and never returned. Local hikers who later passed through the same area claimed to hear low knocks echoing through the trees at night, always in sets of 3, always followed by slow, heavy breathing that faded before dawn. It was September 14th, 2022, in the rugged wilderness of Northern California, where steep cliffs overlooked miles of forest and mist-covered valleys. The air was cool and dry, and the sound of distant rivers echoed faintly through the canyons. Daniel Myers, a 33-year-old climber from Sacramento, had built a reputation among outdoor groups for his steady skill and love for remote ascents. He worked part-time as a climbing instructor and spent most weekends exploring lesser-known cliffs far from popular parks. For Daniel, climbing was not a sport, but a form of meditation. Each handhold a rhythm, each ledge a quiet victory against gravity and fear. His close friend and regular partner, Jenna Collins, often joined him on these trips. She preferred safety and observation, managing base camp while Daniel tackled the higher routes. That September morning, they arrived before sunrise at an unmarked trail leading toward a high limestone ridge known locally as Devil's Step. The formation rose sharply from the valley floor, streaked with cracks and loose stone. Few climbers attempted it, as the slope was steep and the terrain unstable. Daniel saw it as a challenge worth taking. The plan was simple. Daniel would complete a solo ascent by afternoon, then descend before dark. Jenna would stay at camp below, watching with binoculars and maintaining radio contact. The sky was clear at first, with only thin streaks of cloud. Birds circled the upper ridges and the wind carried the faint scent of pine and dry soil. Daniel carefully prepared his ropes and harness, testing every knot twice before beginning his climb. The first few hours went smoothly. The stone face was rough but solid, and Daniel moved with calm precision, anchoring each placement. Sunlight shifted across the rock, painting it in warm gold. Jenna occasionally spotted him through the trees, small, steady, and focused. Around noon, the wind began to change direction, rising from the canyon floor with a deep hum. Dust and loose pebbles rolled down the slopes. By mid-afternoon, a faint haze had spread across the ridge. Then the sounds began. Jenna paused when she heard them. Steady, rhythmic knocks echoing faintly from the cliff face. They were spaced evenly, too deliberate to be falling rock. A few seconds later, she caught another sound. Heavy, uneven breaths carried by the wind from high above. She called out, scanning the cliff for movement, but there was no reply, only silence. Then the faint shift of gravel far up the ridge. As evening shadows lengthened, the shape of Daniel's rope line vanished into darkness. As darkness fell across the ridge, the air grew colder, and the forest below turned silent. Jenna kept scanning the cliff through her binoculars, hoping to spot Daniel's headlamp flicker against the rock. Nothing appeared. The rhythmic knocking she had heard earlier had stopped, replaced by a heavy stillness that pressed against her ears. Even the wind seemed to fade, leaving behind only the faint rustle of loose gravel far above the tree line. Hours passed before she realized he was not coming down. She walked the base trail, calling into the growing darkness, her voice carried away by the echo of her own footsteps. Near the base of the cliff, she found Daniel's pack resting against a boulder, perfectly arranged. His ropes were neatly coiled beside it, carabiners clipped together, helmet resting on top. It looked deliberate, as if placed there by someone with care, but there was no sign of him. By midnight, clouds rolled across the ridge, and the moonlight dimmed. Jenna radioed for help using the emergency frequency they had prepared before the climb. The next morning, search teams arrived. They combed the slopes with ropes and harnesses, shouting Daniel's name into the wind. The surface of the cliff showed faint drag marks near one ledge, but no fall zone was discovered below. Instead, above the ridge, searchers discovered a strange trail in the soft earth. The prints were large, too large for any human, and spaced irregularly, as though from something moving barefoot across the cold soil. Each impression pressed deep, with defined toes and claw-like tips. They led from the cliff's edge into the dense forest beyond and then disappeared completely. No shoe prints, no signs of struggle, and no torn clothing were found nearby. For days, teams scoured the surrounding forest, marking every clearing and ravine. Drones mapped the terrain and dogs traced faint scents that led nowhere. It was as if Daniel had vanished between one step and the next. Jenna remained at camp through every search cycle, watching as fog crept down from the ridge each night. Sometimes, she thought she heard the same slow knocks echo faintly from the cliffs, carried by the wind. After a week, the search was officially called off. Daniel's family arrived to collect his gear. His helmet, ropes, and pack were returned untouched, still clean, still folded exactly as found. Local authorities recorded the disappearance as unexplained, with no evidence of an accident or animal encounter. Months later, hikers reported strange sounds in the same area at dusk. Soft, steady knocks against the rock and the sound of heavy breathing that seemed to follow them along the ridge. No one could explain it, and few returned after dark. The cliff became a quiet, avoided place, where the air always felt heavier and the forest watched in silence. It was June 14, 2018, deep in the cold heart of Siberia, where thick pine forests met long, winding rivers shrouded in mist. The air carried the scent of damp moss and river mud, and the sound of rushing water echoed through empty valleys. Igor Petrov, a 49-year-old fisherman from a small riverside village, had spent his life on these waters. He was quiet and dependable, known for his skill with nets and his understanding of the river's moods. Every morning before sunrise, he would take his small motorboat out to check his fishing lines, often returning with enough catch to supply the local market. Igor had lived alone since his wife passed away several years earlier. His only company was the steady rhythm of the river and the low hum of his outboard motor. Fishing was both his work and his refuge. Even in winter, when ice formed thick sheets across the surface, he found peace in the cold, still silence. To him, nature was not an enemy, but a companion. Vast, wild, and full of hidden patterns he could read like a map. That morning the weather was calm. A soft layer of fog floated above the river, and the water reflected the pale gray sky. Igor packed his tools carefully, nets, bait, a thermos, and spare fuel, and set off before sunrise. The motorboat moved quietly through the still water, its small engine echoing faintly through the trees. He followed the familiar bends of the river, where he had set his nets the previous evening. Hours passed as he worked along the shoreline, pulling up nets and recording his catches in a small notebook. He tied each net neatly along the side of the boat, humming softly under his breath. The forest that surrounded the river was dense and dark, full of whispers carried by the wind. Birds called from hidden branches, and every now and then the surface of the river rippled with unseen movement. As the sun climbed higher, Igor steered his boat toward a shaded bend where tall reeds brushed against the water. There, he stopped to rest and warm his hands with tea, but something felt strange. The forest seemed unusually still. No wind moved through the leaves, and even the birds had gone silent. From across the river, a faint sound echoed, a deep, rhythmic thud, spaced evenly, like something heavy striking wood. Then came a second sound, lower and slower, almost like a long exhale. Igor turned toward the forest edge. The reeds swayed slightly, though no wind blew. He reached for his net pole, heart quickening, eyes scanning the trees. The sound came again, steady, deliberate, closer now, and then the forest went completely quiet. The silence around the river grew heavy, pressing down like the weight of fog itself. Igor's breath came slow and shallow as he stared at the dark forest line. The faint knocking sound returned, now softer, more distant, as if whatever made it had moved deeper into the trees. For several long minutes, nothing else happened. The river flowed quietly, the motor hummed faintly, and Igor tried to steady his racing heart. The calm felt unnatural, stretched too long, too quiet. He leaned forward, scanning the shore once more. Mud glistened between the reeds, slick and uneven, and then he saw them. Large impressions sunk deep into the soil. They were unlike any animal tracks he had ever seen. Wide, long, and shaped almost like bare human feet, but far larger. Each print pressed down with enormous force, the edges filled with water from the river's slow tide. Igor stood frozen, unsure if he was imagining it. Then came another sound, a splash, faint but deliberate, from somewhere downstream. The ripples spread slowly across the still water. The forest, the fog, and the river all seemed to breathe together as if watching him. A chill crawled down his neck. He sat back, hands trembling slightly, and tried to restart his engine, but it sputtered before catching the current. The boat drifted slightly, the slow movement rocking it back and forth. Igor stayed seated, clutching his jacket closed against the cold wind. He kept his eyes on the opposite shore, but no movement came again. The fog grew denser, hiding the riverbanks completely. By the time daylight began to fade, the river had swallowed every sound except the soft hum of the motor. Later that evening, another fisherman spotted Igor's boat drifting near the bend of the river. The motor was idling gently, still warm, the nets stacked neatly, and his tackle undisturbed. Igor lay slumped across the seat, his life jacket still secured, his face pale and calm, eyes open to the gray sky above. There were no marks of struggle, no signs of attack. The cold air had already begun to stiffen his fingers. When the authorities arrived, they found enormous footprints along the muddy bank, wide, deep, and heading straight into the water before vanishing. Broken branches lined the edge, and the reeds were crushed in several places, as though something massive had pushed through. The official cause was listed as hypothermia and exhaustion, a tragic accident in the remote wilderness. Yet locals whispered that something else had been there that day, something that watched from the forest and followed quietly through the fog. Weeks later, some fishermen reported hearing the same deep knocking at dusk, echoing across the still water. Others swore they saw Igor's boat drifting again near the same bend, moving slightly even when the river was calm. The old men of the village now avoid that stretch after sunset. They say the river remembers, and that something out there still walks its banks when the fog begins to rise. It was October 3rd, 2023, deep in the forests of southern Oregon, where heavy fog and towering evergreens blanketed the land in near total darkness. Tom Harlan, a 42-year-old senior park ranger, had been patrolling the area for nearly 2 decades. He was known among colleagues for his calm nature and strong sense of duty, often volunteering for the most isolated night shifts. Born and raised in rural Oregon, Tom had grown up surrounded by wilderness. From a young age, he learned to respect nature's unpredictability. He could identify animal tracks, read subtle changes in wind, and sense when something was off in the forest. On that quiet autumn night, the forest was unusually still. The only sound came from his boots crunching over damp pine needles and the low hum of crickets fading with the cold. His flashlight beam cut through patches of fog, catching droplets of moisture on the branches. He was performing his standard nightly round along a narrow service trail near the edge of an old logging road, several miles from the ranger station. The route was part of a protected area where camping and hunting were prohibited, but reports of trespassers had increased recently, prompting extended patrols. The air smelled of moss and wet bark. His breath fogged in front of him as he scanned the trees. Around 2:45 a.m., the forest floor trembled faintly beneath his boots. At first, Tom thought it was a passing gust or a distant falling tree, but then came a series of deep, rhythmic thumps, steady and deliberate, not random like normal forest sounds. He stopped walking, holding his breath, ears straining in the silence. The next sound chilled him to the core. It was a slow, guttural exhale, heavy and unnatural, carrying across the distance like something breathing through an immense chest. His flashlight flickered, then dimmed, throwing erratic shadows across the trunks. Tom instinctively reached for his radio to contact his partner stationed miles away. Static filled the air, cutting in and out before falling completely silent. Another thump came, this time closer. The ground vibrated under him. He swept the light toward the source, but only saw shifting shadows. A moment later, something large brushed against the edge of his vision. Too big to be human, too tall to match any local animal. His pulse quickened. Then, without warning, a powerful force struck his arm, knocking the flashlight from his grip. It spun across the forest floor, landing face down, its weak beam now casting faint light across the surrounding ferns. The darkness closed in fast. Tom stumbled backward, hitting a fallen log. The air felt heavy, pressing down on his chest. Overhead, branches cracked under immense weight, echoing through the forest like gunshots. Whatever circled him moved fast and with purpose, its steps methodical, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. Tom crouched low against the cold ground, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it over the wind. The faint light from his fallen flashlight cast trembling shadows across the wet leaves. Every few seconds, the sound of weight shifting through the trees surrounded him. He could feel each vibration through his boots, as if the earth itself was warning him to stay still. Then came another deep breath, so close it sent a chill through his spine. The air smelled of damp bark and something musky, like wet fur and soil. A sudden crash broke the stillness. A heavy branch split and fell beside him, scattering dirt and leaves. Tom flinched, instinctively crawling backward until his shoulder pressed against the fallen log. The faint light from the flashlight flickered once more, and for a split second, a tall, broad outline passed in front of it. Whatever it was moved upright, strong enough to bend small trees as it brushed past. The sound was heavy yet smooth, almost cautious, circling him slowly, always just beyond his line of sight. He tried to control his breathing, but his chest tightened with fear. The radio on his belt remained silent, nothing but weak static breaking through the stillness. Tom waited, unmoving as seconds stretched into long, unbearable minutes. Then the footsteps stopped. The forest fell into silence so deep it felt unnatural. Out of nowhere, the sound of something large hitting the ground made him jolt. The flashlight spun again, its beam slicing through the dark, catching only fog and broken branches. Tom rose to his knees, then to his feet, every muscle tense. He turned in a slow circle, trying to see through the mist. His skin prickled, sensing eyes on him even though nothing was visible. The next moment, something struck from behind, throwing him forward onto the dirt. His face hit the ground, and pain shot through his shoulder. He rolled over just in time to see a shadow vanish into the trees, moving faster than anything human. Branches cracked in the distance. Then, silence again. When he finally dared to move, Tom grabbed his flashlight and began to make his way toward the main trail. Every step felt uncertain, his boots slipping on wet roots. His arms and face were scratched from falling, and his uniform was torn where he had hit the log. He stumbled through the dense forest for nearly half an hour before the glow of headlights appeared between the trees. Backup had arrived after his distress call finally went through. When his team reached him, Tom was pale, trembling, and covered in mud. They found massive footprints around the clearing, bare, human-like, but far larger than any known species. Each print sank deep into the soil, spaced in wide strides that suggested something heavy and tall. The prints circled the area and then vanished into thick timber, as if the creature had simply disappeared into the night. In the days that followed, Tom recovered physically, but could not forget the encounter. Other rangers soon reported hearing similar knocks and low breathing in that same stretch of forest. Patrol routes were changed, and night shifts were limited to daylight boundaries. The section where Tom had been attacked was completely marked off. To this day, the area remains avoided after sunset. Locals still whisper about the strange vibrations and distant sounds that echo between the trees, reminders of a night when something unknown walked the Oregon woods, and a ranger lived to tell what the darkness tried to hide. It was August 12th, 2021, in the barren Nevada desert, where endless sand, stone ridges, and silent valleys stretched under a blazing sky. The wind blew dry and sharp, carrying the faint smell of dust and sagebrush. Marcus Wells, a 38-year-old outdoor enthusiast from Reno, was setting out on what he called a cleansing 2-day solo hike. He had planned this trip for weeks, studying maps and loading his GPS with coordinates of the trail that wound through the remote sandstone formations of the Desert Rock Reserve. Marcus was known among his friends for his careful planning and strong fitness. He worked as a park ranger for several years before switching to environmental photography, blending his passion for nature with storytelling. That morning, Marcus parked his truck at the edge of the marked trail and checked his gear one final time. He carried enough food and water for 2 days, a satellite radio, and a camera bag strapped across his chest. The desert was known for its haunting quiet and sudden weather changes. Few hikers ventured there alone, but Marcus enjoyed solitude and found peace in isolation, surrounded by open land that stretched far beyond the horizon. By early afternoon, he had traveled several miles, moving between dry washes and towering red cliffs. His footprints marked a clear trail through the sand. The sun was high, and waves of heat shimmered across the rocks. Small lizards darted between crevices, and the only sound was the faint hum of wind brushing over the canyons. He stopped often to take photographs of the strange rock patterns and the distant mountain line cutting against the blue sky. As the day began to fade, the desert transformed into a world of deep shadows and golden light. Marcus checked his GPS tracker, which flickered once before stabilizing. He noted the coordinates before continuing toward a cluster of boulders that provided cover for the night. The air cooled quickly as evening arrived. Long echoes rolled across the sandstone walls, faint and rhythmic, like slow tapping. It was too regular to be random wind. Marcus raised his head, scanning the ridge above him. The sky turned orange, then gray, and the knocking sound came again. 3 steady thuds, then silence. He assumed it was rockfall or perhaps the cracking of cooling stone after the day's heat. Still, a feeling of unease settled over him. He radioed his partner to check in and describe his location. The transmission broke suddenly, replaced by static. Marcus frowned and adjusted the antenna, but the signal failed. The desert fell completely silent again. Then, from high above, he thought he saw a dark outline, a tall, motionless figure on the ridge. In an instant, it was gone, slipping between the rocks. The rhythmic knocking began again, louder this time, echoing through the canyons. The rhythmic knocking grew louder as darkness deepened over the Nevada desert. Marcus steadied his breath, his flashlight beam cutting through the dry air. Dust swirled in its narrow cone of light, and the shadows of rocks stretched long across the sand. The knocking came again, echoing from different directions now, sometimes near, sometimes far, like something moving between the ridges. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the cliffs, but nothing appeared. The air was still, yet the faint rhythm continued, steady and deliberate. He decided to climb a nearby slope to gain a better view of the area. His boots slipped on loose gravel, and every step made small stones tumble down. The sound felt enormous in the silence. The ridge rose high above the valley, its surface cut by cracks and narrow ledges. As Marcus reached the top, he paused to drink from his bottle, the water warm from the day's heat. He switched off his light to save the battery. The desert around him turned into endless darkness, broken only by the pale glow of distant stars. Then something shifted below. A faint scrape echoed across the rocks. Marcus crouched low, trying to locate the source. The scraping stopped, replaced by the sound of slow, heavy breathing carried on the wind. It was deep and uneven, like air passing through a massive chest. His pulse quickened. He swept his light across the slope but saw nothing, only empty sandstone and sparse brush. Minutes later, the GPS unit on his belt flickered again, flashing irregularly before shutting off completely. Marcus tried to reset it, but the screen stayed dark. He felt a strange pressure in the air, as though the landscape itself was holding its breath. When he looked down toward the valley, he noticed something strange. His footprints in the sand ended abruptly just a few feet from where he stood, though he had clearly climbed from below. The mark stopped cleanly, like erased by invisible hands. By midnight, his radio failed to connect. The knocking resumed again, closer than before, followed by the distinct sound of movement. Slow, deliberate steps that crunched the sand in perfect rhythm. Marcus turned toward the noise, his flashlight trembling in his grip. The beam caught a faint outline far off on the ridge, something tall standing upright, its surface darker than the rock around it. He blinked, and the shape was gone. The next morning, search teams arrived after his partner reported that he had missed check-ins. The rising sun revealed an eerie scene. Marcus's backpack, hat, and water bottle were neatly stacked atop a large flat stone several feet high, arranged in an almost careful manner. His jacket hung from a nearby branch, sleeves pointing straight down as if placed deliberately. Around the site, there were enormous barefoot impressions, each over 7 feet long, leading from the dry wash toward the cliffs before stopping suddenly at the base. No prints led back. There were no signs of a fall or struggle, no drag marks, no trace of Marcus himself. For 3 days, rescue teams scoured the ridges and valleys using drones, dogs, and helicopters, but the desert remained silent. Wind erased the footprints by the second night. Locals who joined the search whispered about the rhythmic knocking that carried faintly through the canyons after sunset. They described the same sense of pressure in the air, as if something unseen watched from the cliffs above. Weeks later, the trail was closed to visitors after more reports of strange sounds and shadows moving along the ridge at dusk. The stacked gear remained the last sign of Marcus Wells, a reminder of how quickly the vast desert could swallow a man without a trace.